There's a long-running conspiracy theory that the government has been secretly spraying chemicals in the atmosphere with planes, and the evidence of this, as the theory goes, is these streaks of cloudy-looking white lines in the sky. You've probably seen them. The reasons the government supposedly might be doing this are many, from attempts to sterilize the population, to mind control, to causing global warming. This chemtrail theory has been investigated many times and debunked. Those white streaks are nothing more than condensation from water vapor, or contrails, coming out of a normal plane engine. However, there is a very real science which predicts that spraying a certain kind of chemical compound into the atmosphere could change the Earth's climate. And some people say this should be done in order to slow down climate change. Hi everyone, I'm Orion, author of The China Front. The story of the China Front revolves around a young man named Andrew, who is sent to China to investigate suspicions that the Chinese government is controlling the weather in the US. During the course of his investigation, he uncovers another conspiracy, one around re-engineering the climate using a method that sounds a lot like chemtrails. So in a lot of ways, I'm not surprised that people have gotten these things confused. Now, China controlling the weather in the US, that's pure fiction. But the science around climate engineering is very real, and there's basically technology available today that could accomplish this. So part of my reason for writing the China Front was actually to bring the truth about geoengineering to the public. And in this video, I'll clarify which aspects of climate engineering and weather control are real and which ones are fiction. The power to control the weather. That's something people have been dreaming about for a long time. And yet it wasn't until the 20th century that humans finally gained their first advantage over the weather. During the Vietnam War, the US government first unleashed weather control as a weapon of warfare. They called it Operation Popeye, and the objective was to cause unexpected rainstorms over the Viet Cong in order to slow down their progress. While the technology worked, it didn't really slow the Viet Cong down, since anyone who lives in a jungle is pretty used to getting rained on. The science behind this is called cloud seeding, and it works by spraying or shooting silver oxide into the air, where it attracts water vapor. That water vapor eventually condenses into clouds that are heavy enough to cause rain. Now, an international treaty called the Environmental Modification Convention was signed by the international community in 1977, banning the use of weather control as a form of warfare. But cloud seeding is still used today for peaceful purposes. For example, the government of Beijing regularly uses cloud seeding to clear the air of clouds and pollution before big events like holidays and meetings of the national government. But humans' desire to control the weather, and even the Earth's climate, has not let up. In fact, the US military remains focused on this, as demonstrated by this report, which was put together in 1999 as a future-looking document about how weather control could be used. In some respects, then, it's not surprising that when the Department of Defense commissioned a secret project called HARP in the early 2000s, with the vague purpose of studying the ionosphere, people began coming up with all kinds of conspiracy theories about this project. Although HARP was shut down in 2014 and the facility is now open to the public, conspiracies still linger, including with some of the main characters in the China Front. And in fact, HARP is partially a central focus in the China Front. Now that's enough fake conspiracies. Let's talk about serious attempts to engineer the climate, also known as geoengineering. This is different from weather control because weather is local, while the climate is global. There are quite a few varieties of geoengineering, and they fall largely into two major categories. One involves changing the levels of carbon in the atmosphere. Since we're already adding carbon at a rapid pace through the burning of fossil fuels, industrial agriculture, and land use changes, the focus here is largely on how to remove carbon. Some of the more popular ideas involve sequestering carbon into giant storage containers underground, as well as storing it in the soil with biochar and other regenerative agriculture practices, or causing biological and chemical reactions in the ocean that would bring carbon down to the ocean floor. But the type of geoengineering that I'm most concerned about is the other category, known as solar radiation management, specifically the use of stratospheric aerosols. The idea is simple and inexpensive. All it would take is a dozen or so modified airplanes flying around the stratosphere spraying these sulfate aerosols. By doing this continuously, we could block out some of the sun's energy, and therefore cool the planet by a few degrees. We know this works because it's essentially what happens when there's a major volcanic eruption. Similar particles from the volcano go into the atmosphere and remain there typically for a few years, having a temporary cooling effect on the planet, and we've measured this with past volcanic eruptions. Eventually, these aerosol particles fall out of the air. So in order to make geoengineering work, we'd have to keep spraying these particles for, well, pretty much indefinitely, or until we completely halt all carbon emissions and start removing carbon from the atmosphere. But the reality right now is that we're a long way from doing that. With the amount of carbon that's in the atmosphere right now, we're looking at about 2 degrees Celsius temperature rise by the end of the century. And that's only if we stop all emissions right now. At the current rate of emissions, we're more likely to reach 4 degrees by the end of the century. And that means the complete melting of polar ice caps, at least 20 feet of sea level rise, the collapse of the entire ocean ecosystem, and major crop failures across the planet. Considering how dire that looks, some people, including a few of the characters in the China Front, are thinking geoengineering might be a great, cheap, last-minute solution, just like dropping a giant ice cube into the ocean every now and then, as was portrayed in this Futurama episode. But the truth is, there are many problems with geoengineering. The biggest one being that, once we start, it's going to be very hard to stop. I hope you'll check out the book to learn more about geoengineering and the conspiracies, both real and imagined, that surround it. You can pick up either a print or an ebook copy by visiting thechinafront.com. And in the next Fact vs. Fiction, we'll talk about the characters in the China Front, which ones are completely made up, and which ones were inspired by real people.